Pretty much set up. Just talk about the Eastern Front. I always think this is a story that hasn't been told in World War II. Everyone knows about the Allies, of course, landing in D-Day in northern France. Basically, without the war on the Eastern Front, there's no way we could have liberated Europe from the Germans. 80% of the German army had to fight on the Eastern Front. 80% of the German army and all the material was based on the Eastern Front. 80% of the casualties from the German army were on the Eastern Front as well. Without the Eastern Front and our Soviet comrades, we would never have ever liberated Europe. And it's a part of the World War II and the theatre that we like to tell in the Northern World War II Association. Our Soviet comrades at the back there, and we'll talk about the uniform and equipment that they've got, and they'll be battling against this German trench. Now, it all started off so well for the German army. They invaded the Soviet Union, Operation Barbarossa, of course, June the 21st, 1941, and in fact reached the gates of Moscow in that year. But then came the coldest winter in living memory, and the Germans weren't equipped for that cold weather. Minus 30, minus 40 degrees. The German army had no winter clothing with them. But the Soviets, of course, were used to battling in these conditions, and Stalin deployed his Siberian shock troops. They had been released from the defense against Japan. They had just signed a treaty where there was a spy in Tokyo that realized that the Japanese were not going to invade the Soviet Union. So Stalin made a very sensible gamble based on his knowledge and released a lot of troops that were defending the borders against Japan. And he released the so-called Siberian shock troops, which were winter trained, and they counterattacked the Germans in 1941. Germans were put right back on the back foot then, who of course then spent the next couple of years advancing slowly into the Soviet Union. Russia was only one country in the Soviet Union. Now, what the Soviets will do, they will use a Katyusha barrage to actually soften up the German position. Now, Katyushas are rockets, and they very much a feared weapon. Now, these Katyusha rockets were deployed very, very quickly on lorries, and the Germans feared them so much. If you were ever captured as a Soviet, as a Katyusha rocket firer, as part of that, you were summarily shot and executed. Now, the Katyushas are in the distance, so they're flying over their heads at the moment, but what a fearsome sound that would have been to the Germans to hear all those. Literally tens of thousands of Katyusha rockets flying overhead and landing. They weren't a very accurate weapon, but if they were fired in a barrage, you know, you've got a good majority will actually hit the target. And soon as these were fired, the Soviets could start up their lorry and just rearm them and deploy them to another place. So it gave a really good clue to the Germans that there were going to be a Soviet assault on this German trench. Now, the Eastern Front was a very, very bitter campaign. No ground was given on either side. If you were captured as a German, you were taken back to the gulags in the Ural Mountains and basically worked to death. If you were captured as a Soviet and taken back to Germany, you were worked to death or put in a concentration camp and executed as well. It was a war of totally different ideologies. Adolf Hitler versus Stalinism. Fascism against communism. Executions were commonplace. If you were wounded, you were shot by the other side. There are accounts of whole hospitals where people were just murdered and shot in their beds. No ground was given on any side. So this is going to be a very, very bitter campaign. It is not like the Western Front. The Germans used the excuse that Russia, the Soviet Union, had not signed the Geneva Convention. And the Germans used this as an excuse to commit horrendous against the Soviet people. Well over 20 million people died in the Soviet Union. Now that's half the population of Great Britain. So if you imagine that, half the population of this country dying in this campaign. Now, So we're about to start the battle, and I do remind you again, this is very, very loud. If you are susceptible to loud noises, it is really advisable to put your fingers in your ears. It is loud. So, at the back of the battlefield, we see an armoured car, and this is a gas jeep. These gas jeeps will be used to transport senior NCOs and officers around the battlefield. It's a bit like the American Willis Jeep, really. And this would be, say, an officer in the back there. Now, the Red Army at this point, 1944, was the biggest and finest fighting army the world had ever seen. Gone were the days of the Stalin purges, when all the generals and senior officers were executed and tried for being anti-communist. Stalin was very astute, more so than Hitler, to be fair. He realised that the best decisions were made in theatre, on the battlefield. He trusted his generals to know what was best, and the Red Army adapted and evolved into this finest fighting army the world had ever seen. And the Germans knew this. They'd never come across tougher troops than this. They could disguise themselves in literally 5 or 10 minutes. All their equipment worked. Even minus 30, minus 40 degrees, the Soviet equipment worked. They developed a special oil that wouldn't freeze. The German weapons were freezing. So here we see the high point of the Red Army, the Red Banner. And a lot of the soldiers in the Red Army will be fighting in the Polotka, which is the cloth cap, literally translated as pilot's cap. More sensible, of course, to fight in the hard helmet, but it was a mark of your manhood, if you like. And Stalin called for actual total war. And total war meant everybody had to fight. So that was women were fighting in the front line, women drove tanks, and women flew aircraft. Total war. Everyone had to fight for the motherland to defeat the fascist dog, the fascist invader that was taking over their precious motherland. And the Soviet army, so we're talking about very efficient. One of the big things Stalin said was, not one more step backwards. And this happened with Stalingrad. He was sick of the troops retreating, so he appointed political commissaires. And the political commissaire had blue trousers on, and he used to hide behind the main fighting of the Soviet soldiers, and any Soviet soldiers that retreated were shot by the political commissar. And this really boosted up morale with the Soviets. It was no point in retreating as a Soviet soldier. You were just basically shot by your own side. If you were captured as a Soviet soldier and managed to escape from the Germans, you were taken to the political commissar, questioned and shot as well for having the cheek to be captured alive. It was a fight to the death. It was this very bitter campaign. No quarter was given on any side. The Soviets had a really nice trick. In the cold weather, all the German bodies used to freeze overnight. They used to sneak onto the front line, and they used to collect all the German bodies, contorted into hideous positions, and they used to make a nice pyramid of all the bodies, all nice and stiff. So when the Germans woke up in the morning, there was a nice pile of their comrades stacked into a nice pyramid shape. And then the bodies were disfigured as well, but we won't go into that detail. So it was a very, very bitter campaign. So we see the gas jeep, reconnaissance on the German trenches, a German counter-attack in the middle there. And at this point in the war, the German soldiers were experimenting with different types of camouflage. The very sort of iconic splinter pattern from the Wehrmacht. And all these German soldiers from a regiment called the Gross Deutschland. The Gross Deutschland regiment fought extensively on the Eastern Front, and they were the only Wehrmacht or German army unit to be awarded the Krupp title from no less than Adolf Hitler himself. You'll see the Krupp title worn on their right sleeve. The SS wore their Krupp title on the left sleeve. These are German army from the Wehrmacht, and on that Krupp title it says Gross Deutschland, or Greater Germany, which of course was Hitler's great gene, the so-called Lebensraum. was a living space for the German nation, and he looked to the east to provide this. Now, the Großdeutschland were the best equipped German army Wehrmacht regiment. They had the best uniforms, the best equipment and the best weapons, and their job was to fill all the gaps that were left in the defences where the Soviets had broken through. Highly trained, highly motivated German army soldiers. So let's see how they get on pushing this counter-attack back. Now, the German Army main rifle for the infantrymen was the Mauser K98, 7.92 caliber rifle. All these are live weapons and actually used throughout World War II, so if you imagine the history of these weapons, they're getting well over 80, 90 years old, a lot of them now, but all kept in nice working order by the reenactors. Now again, there's a counter-attack coming in here by the Soviets. Let's see how the Großdeutschland take on this. A few German casualties. And the officer in charge here, looks like an lieutenant, which is a lieutenant. Now, the last thing you want to be doing is captured as wounded in the battlefield, so it's definitely very, very important to take your comrades back. If you were wounded on the battlefield, basically the Soviets would just shoot you and kill you. They wouldn't take you back. There was no first aid. No one had signed a Geneva Convention here. It was an absolutely bitter, hideous campaign. Germans putting another counter-attack in from the Großdeutschland regiment. A really good iconic view of the German soldier there, the shell helm, the steel helmet, and the silver pattern camouflage. On the back of the equipment there, the German soldiers, bread bags, and gas masks and water canteens. This is the assault equipment, very light assault equipment. Most of it's left in the base there, and this will be free them up for fighting. The iconic jack boots as well. A lot of soldiers at this time were given just ammunition boots and gaiters, just to save on leather, to keep the cost down. Germany, of course, at this time was being heavily bombarded, and all the factories were being bombed. There was certainly no schnitzel. Those factories had been bombed. They were the first to copy the schnitzel factories. So, counter-attack by the German Großdeutschland. Automatic weapons had a range of about 30 metres. Certainly holding the Soviets here. Now we're talking about the German equipment. The Soviet equipment was excellent as well. And so rallying around the red banner there, the red flag with the iconic hammer and the sickle on. This is a real landmark site in these sort of battles here. A rallying point for the Soviet troops. Gone are the days when the massed attacks of the Soviet troops, and basically just one MG-42 could just hose the Soviets down. They were very astute soldiers at this time, well led, extremely well motivated with the Soviet troops. So, this German trench is proving a hard nut to crack at the moment. They've counter-attacked twice, the Germans have counter-attacked twice as well. And the German officer in charge has been very sensible. He's keeping a lot of soldiers in reserve in the trench here. I always think it takes probably twice or even 3 times as many soldiers to attack a defensive position that's been heavily defended. It looks like there's going to be some more reinforcements. We're talking about the political commissar earlier on. You can spot him with the blue cap on there. His job is to raise morale with the Soviet soldiers. And he would do that, as we were saying earlier, by waiting about 60 to 100 metres from the main attacking firing line, and any Soviet soldiers that retreated, he would shoot. So it was never a good idea to retreat in front of the enemy, because you were basically shot by your own side. And Hitler absolutely despised these political commissars. They were full members of the Communist Party. Any political commissar that was captured, and this was decreed by a Führer order, were taken and executed on the spot. If you were captured as a political commissar, you were taken and executed. You can see him there in his blue cap, very much feared by the regular Soviet troops, and he'll be looking there to make sure everyone was fulfilling the ideals of the Communist Party and Stalin himself. And leading from the front there.
It has
how we get on. Some more Soviets coming round on the thing. The idea with the Soviets here, the best thing to do is to try and what's called roll up the trench. If you can get into the side of one side of the trenching your position, it's really just a case of rolling it up. You can throw gunfire down the trench, kill a lot of soldiers. Attacking it frontally is never a good idea. If you can work your way down the side of the trench and even start hand-to-hand combat, that's the way to roll up this trench. So this is what the Soviets are attempting to do, to work themselves around the side of the German trench and just to basically move along the trench, killing all the soldiers in it. And they'll be doing this with small arms weapons and hand-to-hand fighting. The Soviets were extremely good at hand-to-hand fighting. They always used to carry a wooden spoon, very, very fond of cooking, but they used to sharpen the end of the wooden spoon. And this was used as a dagger to actually stab soldiers in the neck. So we see the German soldiers here. They know what's going to happen, that the Soviets are going to try and work around the side of the trench. And they're going to do all they can to actually avoid this. The last thing they want is the Soviets to actually breach this defensive position and work their way along. Now, every battle has ups and downs of it, and these lulls in the battle are perfectly normal. It's when the soldiers are getting themselves organised again, maybe counting how much ammunition they've got, any casualties that were around, and listening basically to the orders of the senior NCOs and officers ready for the next stage. And we see the senior NCO blowing his whistle, and the whistle means an assault on the trench. And what we're going to do is work our way along the side of the trench. And you can imagine the German face here. They're starting to sort of panic here. They know what's actually coming. We were here. The half, some Germans surrounding, and it's all hand-to-hand combat. Some are taken prisoner there. There will be never any prisoners taking place here. Now, the Soviets here have breached the trench on one side, and all now it is a case of mopping up along the trench and using the small arms weapons to actually roll up this trench. Some more Germans surrendering. And we're talking about total war there. They've actually reached the machine gun emplacement. Some more Germans surrendering and meant to kneel down there. Exactly what the Germans didn't want is to use this trench bridge. So we see some German prisoners here. Now we're talking how difficult it was on the Eastern Front. Very grim prospect for these Germans at the moment. They could be actually shot by the political commissaire. Now, it looks a brutal campaign, and indeed it was. You imagine your country being invaded. They had to fight. They hated the fascists. They would do anything to get rid of them. And it was an extremely brutal campaign. They would say there was executions on either side. Hurrah, ladies and gentlemen, it is a victory for our Soviet comrades. Give them a really, really fantastic round of applause. Now all our reenactors there, just raise there, and we'll have a good look at you. They're actually not dead, ladies and gentlemen. It's all a make-believe. But that was a brilliant reenactment, wasn't it? Eastern Front. Let's give our reenactors a massive Whitby round of applause. Right, ladies and gentlemen, if you enjoyed that, we'll come back to the next shows, which are the Sniper. That's in about an hour's time. I'll tell you exactly when that is later on. Enjoy the rest of the living history. Go and get yourself a cup of tea. Get yourself to the bar. Do stay out of the battlefield area. I'll see you later on, guys. My name's Paul Hutchinson. I do the commentary for the Northern World War II, and I'll see you later on. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.